Look around you. Look at the frantic, desperate ballet of human existence. Every day, millions of people wake up and hurl themselves into a meat grinder of their own making. They chase money, they beg for affection, they claw for status, and they weep when the world denies them their prizes. They believe they are free actors making independent choices, but they are not. They are puppets, and the strings that make them dance are woven from their own unchecked desires. Welcome to the trap. You were born into it. Society constructed its walls before you took your first breath. It is an invisible prison built on a single, devastating lie, that to get what you want, you must desperately hunger for it. You have been taught that desire is the engine of achievement, that passion and yearning are the keys to the kingdom. But look closely at the men and women who hunger the most. They are weak. They are constantly at the mercy of external forces, a boss's mood, a lover's whim, a market's fluctuation. Because they want so badly, they can be bought. Because they fear losing what they want, they can be controlled. Their desires are the handles by which the world steers them into submission. Now, consider a man who held the known world in his palm, Marcus Aurelius. History has sanitized him. Modern pop psychology and self-help peddlers have neutered his legacy, painting him as a weary, gentle saint who sat in a silken tent jotting down affirmations to help him cope with a stressful day. They read his meditations as a defensive manual, a guide on how to take a beating from life and smile through the blood. What a comforting, pathetic delusion for the powerless. Marcus Aurelius was the emperor of the Roman Empire. He was the most powerful human being on the face of the earth. He commanded legions that could wipe entire civilizations from the map. He held the power of absolute life and death over millions. He did not write his private diaries to merely survive. He wrote them to rule. He wrote them to conquer. And the first territory he had to conquer was the treacherous, whispering landscape of his own mind. To understand Marcus Aurelius through the lens of power is to unlock the darkest, most potent secret of human psychology. The art of getting what you want begins by completely destroying your need for it. This is the central pivot of the emperor's strategy, and it is the only way out of the trap. As long as you are attached to the outcome, you are a slave to it. When you need someone to agree with you, you give them power over your emotional state. When you desperately need a specific victory, your anxiety makes you clumsy, reactive, and predictable. You telegraph your moves. You negotiate from a position of deficit. The world smells your desperation like blood in the water, and it will charge you a premium for every inch of ground you try to take. Marcus understood this paradox. To dominate the external world, one must retreat entirely into the internal fortress. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. This is not a quote about passive acceptance. It is a chillingly calculated declaration of psychological warfare. Imagine a man who walks into a negotiation needing nothing. He does not care if the deal is struck or if it collapses. He is entirely self-contained. He observes the frantic energy of the other party, their nervous tics, their subtle tells, their desperate posturing, with the cold, detached eye of an apex predator. Because he does not need the outcome, his vision is perfectly clear. He can see the board. He can manipulate the pieces. He dictates the terms because he is the only one in the room who is truly free to walk away. This is the power of the Stoic emperor. By severing the emotional strings that tie you to external validation, you do not become a passive observer of your life. You become an immovable object around which the rest of the world must inevitably bend. The trap relies on your reactivity. It needs you to get angry when insulted, anxious when threatened, and ecstatic when praised. It uses these emotional spikes to keep you off balance. Marcus Aurelius trained himself to look at the glittering prizes of the world, wealth, fame, imperial glory, and see them for what they were, empty vessels. He stripped away the illusions. He looked at vintage wine and saw fermented grape juice. He looked at the imperial purple robes and saw sheep's wool dyed with the blood of shellfish. He looked at the frantic scrambling of ambitious men and saw the twitching of dying insects. By devaluing the prizes of the world, he became the master of them. The men who sought to flatter him found no traction, for he did not value their praise. The enemies who sought to terrify him found a wall of ice, for he had already made peace with his own death. He was untouchable. And because he was untouchable, he was able to execute his will upon the world with ruthless, unclouded precision. This is the psychological framework we are going to build within you. We are not here to make you feel better. We are not here to offer you comforting platitudes about accepting your lot in life. We are here to arm you. We are here to dismantle the architecture of your current mind, to tear down the weak, reactive, desire-driven programming that society has installed in you, and to replace it with the cold, heavy iron of imperial discipline. You want power? You want wealth? You want absolute sovereignty over your own existence and the ability to bend your reality to your will? Then you must first step into the fire and burn away the desperate, whimpering child inside you that begs for the world's permission. You must recognize the trap for what it is. You must look at the strings attached to your limbs, trace them back to the hands that hold them, and take up the sword to cut them clean. The journey ahead is dark. It requires a brutal, unflinching honesty that most people are too terrified to endure. You will have to face your own vanities, your own hypocrisies, and your own pathetic dependencies. But if you survive the crucible, you will emerge on the other side as something entirely different. You will no longer be the puppet. You will be the one holding the strings. Turn the page and let the dissection begin. History is written by the survivors, but it is curated by the sentimental. For centuries, the world has been fed a comforting, pacifying myth about Marcus Aurelius. We are told the tale of the philosopher king, a gentle, weeping sage who reluctantly wore the purple, a man who wished only to retreat to his tent and pen beautiful thoughts about the cosmos while the world burned around him. It is a beautiful lie, and it is a lie designed to keep you weak. To master the art of getting what you want, you must look past the sanitized pages of modern self-help and stare directly into the abyss of antiquity. You must understand what I call the historical pivot. This is not a date on a timeline. It is a psychological mutation. It is the precise juncture where a man ceases to be a passive student of philosophy and transforms into a chillingly effective architect of reality. Look closely at the marble busts that survive him. The blank, stone eyes do not speak of a man who surrendered to fate. They speak of a man who devoured it. The year was 161 AD. When Marcus ascended to the throne, he did not inherit a golden age of peace and prosperity. He inherited a dying, thrashing beast. The Parthian Empire had breached the eastern borders, slaughtering Roman legions and threatening to tear the empire in two. The Antonine Plague, brought back by returning soldiers, ravaged the streets of Rome, choking the capital in the sweet, sickly stench of burning flesh. Floods destroyed the grain supply. Famine set in. The Germanic tribes massed like wolves at the northern frontier. Most men break under the weight of such apocalyptic chaos. They fall to their knees. They pray to silent gods. They bargain with fate. They seek distractions, or they lash out in blind, impotent rage. Marcus did neither. He executed the historical pivot. He realized, in the cold, flickering candlelight of his command tent, that virtue without leverage is utterly useless. He understood that the chaos surrounding him was not a punishment from the heavens. It was raw, unshaped clay. The pivot is the realization that your desires, whether they be power, stability, legacy, or absolute freedom, cannot be manifested through mere wishing or moral purity. You must divorce your emotions from your objectives. Do not mistake his stoicism for passivity. The weak use philosophy as a shield to hide from the cruelty of the world. The sovereign uses it as a whetstone to sharpen his blade. Marcus Aurelius did not write meditations to soothe his anxiety. He wrote it to program his mind for absolute, ruthless execution. He was rewriting his own psychological source code, stripping away fear, pity, and hesitation, leaving only the cold machinery of strategy. Consider the ultimate test of his reign, the betrayal of Avidius Cassius in 175 AD. Cassius was not merely a general, he was Marcus's most trusted commander in the East, a man who had won the Parthian War. Hearing a false rumor that Marcus had died of the plague, Cassius declared himself emperor. Even when the rumor was proven false, Cassius did not back down. He kept the purple. He prepared for war. A lesser man would have let his ego dictate his response. A typical tyrant would have flown into a blinding rage, demanded the traitor's head on a spike, and marched his legions eastward, fracturing the empire in a bloody, exhausting civil war. But Marcus had mastered the art of getting what he wanted. And what he wanted was the preservation of his empire, the loyalty of the Eastern legions, and the complete psychological annihilation of his enemy's narrative. Marcus sat in his tent, surrounded by the maps of a divided world, and he smiled the cold, terrifying smile of a predator who has already anticipated the trap. He did not react, he orchestrated. He publicly addressed his troops, but he did not speak of vengeance. Instead, he wept for his friend's madness. He openly offered Cassius total forgiveness. He stated that his only regret was that Cassius might be killed before Marcus had the chance to embrace him and pardon him. It was a masterstroke of psychological warfare. By offering divine magnanimity, Marcus entirely stripped Cassius of his casus belli. He made it impossible for Cassius to play the role of the liberator fighting a tyrant. Suddenly, Cassius was not a rival emperor. He was just an ungrateful, tragic madman fighting a saint. The result? Marcus never had to draw his sword. Cassius's own men, terrified by the emperor's unnatural calm and suffocated by his overwhelming psychological dominance, turned on their commander. They assassinated Cassius and brought his head to Marcus. Marcus, maintaining his unbreakable frame, refused to look at the severed head and ordered it buried. He achieved total victory, preserved his army, and secured his throne, all by weaponizing his own restraint. This is the historical pivot in action. It is the transition from reacting to the world to forcing the world to react to you. How do you apply this to your own life? You must undergo your own pivot. You must realize that the people in your way, the circumstances bleeding you dry, the crises threatening to break you, they are not obstacles. They are the board upon which the game is played. When you want something, a promotion, the destruction of a rival, the loyalty of a partner, the acquisition of wealth, you must stop operating from a place of emotional need. Need is the scent of prey. You must become the cold center of the storm. You must look at the board with the dead, calculating eyes of a marble statue. You do not beg reality to yield. You do not throw tantrums when the plague hits or the traitor strikes. You ask yourself one chilling question. How does this serve my ultimate design? The art of getting what you want begins the moment you murder your reliance on favorable conditions. You must become a creature of the dark, a sovereign who sits upon the throne of his own mind, untouchable by the petty anxieties of mortal men. Marcus Aurelius conquered the known world, not because he was a good man, but because he was a man who learned how to turn the very fabric of chaos into a weapon. Now it is your turn to take up the blade. Look closely at the men and women who surround you. Watch them thrash against the currents of their own lives, expending vast reserves of energy to change the minds of others, to force outcomes, to bend the world to their fragile wills. They scream, they scheme, they beg, and they break. They are players who do not realize they are on a board, pieces moved by invisible forces they refuse to acknowledge. To the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, the world was not a chaotic storm to be fought, but a complex, interlocking machine. And to get what you want from this world, you must stop striking the exterior of the machine and learn to understand its hidden mechanism. Welcome to the third chamber of the Emperor's mind. Here, we do not deal in the petty tactics of persuasion or the loud, clumsy displays of modern dominance. Here, we dissect the hegemonicon, the directing mind, the central gear upon which all reality turns. Most people operate under a fatal delusion. They believe that power is exerted outward. They believe that to acquire wealth, status, or compliance, they must push their desire into the world with enough force that the world eventually yields. This is the strategy of the brute, and it is why the brute eventually exhausts himself. Marcus Aurelius understood a chilling, counterintuitive truth. True power, the kind of power that bends reality effortlessly, is not an outward push. It is an inward retraction. Consider a puppet. The puppet believes it is walking, talking, and fighting. But above the stage, in the darkness, sits the puppeteer, gently pulling the strings. In the theater of human life, those strings are our desires, our fears, our vanities, and our desperately held attachments. Every time you want something too badly, you hand a string to the world. Every time you fear an outcome, you hand a string to your enemy. The hidden mechanism of getting what you want begins with a ruthless severing of these strings. The emperor called it finding the inner citadel. When you detach your emotional necessity from your desired outcome, a terrifying shift occurs. You cease to be the puppet, you become the puppeteer. Imagine entering a negotiation, a conflict, or a seduction. The other person is vibrating with need. They are calculating, sweating, hoping, fearing. They are completely entangled in their own biological and psychological machinery. You, on the other hand, have stepped outside the mechanism. Because you have trained yourself to require nothing from them. Because your hegemonicon is perfectly insulated from their rejection or their approval. You become an immovable object. Your silence becomes heavy. Your gaze becomes piercing. You do not react. You simply observe the gears turning in their heads. This profound, stoic detachment is not passive. It is the most aggressive, chillingly effective weapon in the arsenal of human psychology. When men realize they cannot trigger you, they panic. When they cannot find the strings of your desires, they begin to project their own desires onto you. They will start negotiating against themselves. They will offer you what you want, simply to relieve the agonizing tension of your absolute, unbothered stillness. But mastering the mechanism requires more than just internal detachment. It requires a clinical, almost predatory understanding of the mechanisms of others. Marcus Aurelius commanded the greatest empire on earth, not by expecting people to be noble, but by understanding exactly what they were: flawed, predictable, and driven by self-interest. When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. This famous meditation is not a complaint, it is a tactical briefing. It is the emperor calibrating his expectations to the reality of the human machine. If a gear is designed to turn left, you do not become angry when it turns left. You do not try to persuade it to turn right. You simply build your machine knowing that the gear will turn left. If you know a man is driven by vanity, do not condemn his vanity. Use it. Let him feel he has won. Let him claim the credit. Feed his mechanism exactly what it needs to function, while you quietly extract the result you desire. If a rival is driven by insecurity, do not attack him directly, for that only arms his defenses. Instead, create a vacuum of validation. Watch him stumble into the void you have created. The art of getting what you want is the art of frictionless operation. It is allowing other people to defeat themselves upon the walls of your emotional discipline. There is a rhythm to the universe, a logos, a rational order that governs the rise and fall of kings, the passing of seasons, and the petty squabbles of the Senate. The fool fights this rhythm. He tries to swim upstream, exhausting his muscles against the inevitable. The emperor aligns himself with the current. This is the doctrine of amor fati, a love of fate. But do not mistake this for submission. It is a calculated yielding. It is the martial artist who uses his opponent's momentum to throw him to the floor. When an obstacle appears in your path, the hidden mechanism dictates that you do not batter yourself against it. You absorb it. You redefine it. As Marcus wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." If you are denied a promotion, that is not a failure. It is the mechanism revealing the true nature of your superiors, freeing you to outmaneuver them in the shadows. If you are betrayed, it is not a tragedy. It is the mechanism purging a faulty component from your inner circle. By reframing every setback as a necessary turn of the gears, you become invincible. Your enemies will be bewildered. They will strike you, expecting you to bleed, and instead, they will watch you forge their weapon into a tool for your own ascent. To get what you want, you must become a master of the unseen. Look past the flesh, the words, and the noise. See the gears. See the strings. Cut your own. Then, with the cold, benevolent authority of a Roman emperor, reach out into the darkness and turn the wheel. History has a habit of sanitizing its masters. Over the millennia, the world has painted Marcus Aurelius in the soft, forgiving light of absolute virtue. They depict him as a saint wrapped in a purple toga, a harmless philosopher who just happened to rule the known world. They read Meditations as a diary of a gentle soul seeking inner peace. But history is a narrative written for the masses, designed to comfort them. The truth of absolute power is never bathed in pure light. It requires the heavy, suffocating embrace of the shadow. To master the art of getting what you want, truly getting it, in a world that constantly seeks to take it from you, you must understand the shadow advice of the emperor. You must look past the marble statues and the stoic calm and peer into the calculated, chillingly pragmatic mind of a supreme predator who chose to act like a philosopher. Virtue without fangs is merely victimhood. Marcus Aurelius did not rule an empire of enlightened scholars. He ruled Rome. It was an empire of wolves, assassins, sycophants, and usurpers. You do not survive the serpentine corridors of the Palatine Hill by merely being good. You survive by being inherently more dangerous than the monsters surrounding you, yet possessing the absolute, terrifying discipline to keep your blade sheathed until the exact necessary moment. The first rule of the shadow is the illusion of harmlessness. Marcus understood that overt displays of power invite resistance. The tyrant who beats his chest and demands submission creates enemies. The philosopher king, however, disarms his opponents before the battle even begins. By presenting himself as a reluctant ruler, a man dedicated to duty rather than ambition, he neutralized the envy of his rivals. People do not plot against a man they believe is indifferent to the throne. They plot against the man who guards it too fiercely. To get what you want, you must obscure your desire for it. Let others believe you are simply fulfilling a role. Conceal your ambition behind a veil of reluctant duty. Then comes the weaponization of empathy. Modern minds view empathy as a weakness, a bleeding heart's folly. In the shadow of Stoicism, empathy is elite intelligence gathering. Marcus wrote, "Enter into every man's ruling reason." This is not a plea for compassion. It is a directive for psychological infiltration. To bend reality to your will, you must map the minds of those who stand in your way. What do they fear? What petty vanities drive them? What childhood insecurities dictate their adult tantrums? By truly understanding the desires and ego of your opponent, you dismantle them from the inside out. You do not argue with them. You align with their internal narrative. You give them exactly what they think they want, binding them to your will without them ever realizing they have been conquered. True power is making your will feel like their idea. But to execute this, you must construct the fortress of absolute detachment. What makes a man truly terrifying? It is not his anger. Anger is predictable. anger can be baited, manipulated, and exhausted. What is terrifying is absolute, chilling indifference. The shadow of Stoicism teaches the mastery of apatheia, not as mere emotional control, but as a tactical void. When you desire nothing, nobody can hold anything over you. Marcus systematically stripped away the allure of fame, wealth, and pleasure in his own mind. In doing so, he reduced his enemy's leverage to ash. If you threaten the man with the loss of his wealth and he does not care for gold, your threat is powerless. If you threaten him with death and he views mortality as a mere transition of atoms, you have lost your ultimate weapon. When you no longer care whether you win or lose the game, you suddenly control the board. The man who needs nothing dictates the terms of everything. This detachment allows for the ruthless execution of duty. Marcus spent over a decade freezing in the mud of the Germanic frontier, fighting the Marcomannic Wars. He ordered the deaths of tens of thousands. He did not weep, nor did he rejoice in the slaughter. He simply did what the preservation of the empire required. The shadow advice dictates that action must be entirely divorced from emotion. Getting what you want often requires crossing a threshold of discomfort that breaks lesser minds. You must be willing to make the cold, harsh decisions that others shy away from, and you must do it with a steady, unshakable hand. You do not act out of malice, you act out of necessity. It is the cold math of power. Nowhere is this shadow more evident than in his handling of betrayal. When his most trusted general, Avidius Cassius, declared himself emperor in the East, Marcus did not erupt into a vengeful rage. A lesser king would have demanded the traitor's head on a spike to satisfy his bruised ego. Marcus saw an opportunity for a masterpiece of psychological warfare. He marched to meet the rebellion, but he instructed his troops that they would not slaughter the usurpers. He planned to capture Cassius alive, to publicly forgive him, and to show the empire what true, unassailable superiority looked like. When Cassius was assassinated by his own men before Marcus arrived, the emperor wept, not out of love, but because he was robbed of his ultimate power play. Forgiveness, when wielded by a man capable of total destruction, is the most dominating force on earth. It shatters the enemy's moral framework and binds them to you in eternal, indebted shame. The Meditations were not a diary of a soft man seeking solace. They were the psychological armor of an apex authority actively taming the beast within, precisely so he could tame the world outside. To master the art of getting what you want, you must integrate this shadow. You must cultivate the capacity for absolute ruthlessness, yet bind it with unbreakable discipline. Speak softly, observe deeply, detach entirely, and strike only when the math of victory is absolute. That is the true way of the emperor. Power is rarely what the uninitiated believe it to be. The amateur covets volume. He believes that dominance is a roaring lion, a clenched fist, a voice raised above the din of the crowd. He seeks to control his environment through sheer brute force, exhausting his energy to bend the world to his will. But step into the quiet, shadowed halls of true authority, and you will find no such desperation. True dominance is not a roar. It is a terrifying, immovable silence. Welcome to the 5th chapter of our exploration into the mind of Marcus Aurelius. Here we dissect the architecture of strategic dominance. For the philosopher king, ruling an empire that stretched across the known world was not an exercise in aggression, but a masterclass in psychological gravity. To get what you want, you must paradoxically cease to desperately chase it. You must become the absolute center of the board, forcing the pieces to revolve around your stillness. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." This is not merely a comforting platitude for the defeated. It is the ultimate blueprint for psychological warfare. The foundation of strategic dominance is the creation of the inner citadel, an impenetrable fortress of emotional detachment. In the theater of human interaction, whether in the boardroom, in negotiation, or in the subtle power dynamics of a relationship, the one who cares the most is the one who holds the least power. Emotion is a string that others can pull. When you react with anger, fear, or over-eagerness, you hand your opponent the marionette cross. You dance to their tempo. Dominance begins when you cut the strings. Imagine your adversary sitting across from you. They deploy a provocation, a subtle insult, a sudden delay, a shifting of the goalposts. They expect the predictable human reaction: frustration, defense, or negotiation. Instead, you offer them nothing but the cold, unblinking gaze of a marble statue. You do not flinch. You do not rush to fill the uncomfortable silence. You simply observe them, detached and analytical, as if watching a predictable insect caught in a web. In that chilling void of non-reaction, the power dynamic instantly, violently shifts. Their provocation dissolves into the ether, and they are left drowning in the deafening echo of their own insecurity. By refusing to engage in their emotional game, you have asserted total dominance over the reality of the room. Silence is the heaviest weapon in the Stoic arsenal. Marcus Aurelius understood that words are a currency, and like any currency, overprinting leads to hyperinflation. The more you speak, the cheaper your words become. The master of strategic dominance hoards his words like ancient gold. When he speaks, it is deliberate, calculated, and final. If you want to extract truth, concessions, or capitulation from an opponent, weaponize your silence. Ask your question, state your term, and then close your mouth. Let the other person project their anxieties into the silence. Let them negotiate against themselves. People abhor a vacuum, and in their desperate attempt to fill the quiet, they will hand you the very keys to their kingdom. But what of the obstacles? What of the adversaries who are cunning, the circumstances that betray you, the plans that shatter against the jagged rocks of fate? Here the Stoic emperor unveils the most terrifying aspect of his dominance, the alchemy of amor fati, the love of fate. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. To the ordinary mind, a roadblock is a tragedy. To the strategically dominant mind, a roadblock is raw material. When an enemy moves against you, they expect resistance. They have calculated your defense. Do not give them the battle they prepared for. Instead, absorb their momentum. If they try to ruin your reputation, use the newfound attention to pivot the narrative. If they deny you a resource, use the scarcity to innovate a method that makes their resource obsolete. You do not merely survive the attacks of your enemies, you consume them. You digest their hostility and turn it into your own fuel. When an opponent realizes that every trap they set for you only makes you stronger, their will to fight crumbles. You defeat them not by breaking their shield, but by breaking their spirit. This requires a profound, almost chilling level of patience. The uninitiated want immediate victory. They want the quick kill. But strategic dominance is a game of attrition. Marcus Aurelius spent years on the frozen frontiers of Germania, fighting endless, grinding wars against barbarian tribes. He did not win through a single glorious charge. He won through the relentless, suffocating pressure of his endurance. He outlasted them. In your own life, you must adopt the mindset of the glacier. A glacier does not rush, it does not shout, but it moves with the terrifying, inevitable weight of 1,000,000 tons of ice, carving through solid granite simply by refusing to stop. When you are negotiating for a higher position, when you are building an empire, when you are extracting what you want from an unwilling world, do not rely on sudden bursts of passion. Passion burns out. Rely on cold, methodical persistence. Let the other side exhaust themselves with their maneuvers, their tantrums, and their emotional fluctuations. You remain rooted, an immovable king on an obsidian throne. Finally, strategic dominance requires the ultimate psychological paradox. You must detach your self-worth from the outcome. Marcus Aurelius ruled Rome, but he constantly reminded himself that Rome too would one day turn to dust. Fame is fleeting, wealth is transient, and the applause of the crowd is a fickle wind. When you no longer need the outcome to validate your existence, you become incredibly dangerous. You can walk away from any table. You can look a tyrant in the eye and feel no fear, because they hold nothing that you truly value. Your only treasure is your own sovereignty. When you operate from this deep internal stillness, the world senses it. People are drawn to the gravity of the unbothered. They will offer you what you want precisely because you no longer beg for it. This is the art of getting what you want, not by chasing it into the dark, but by becoming the flame that the moth cannot help but fly toward. Build your inner citadel, weaponize your silence, consume your obstacles, and rule your reality with the cold, majestic dominance of an emperor. There is a threshold in the architecture of human psychology, a quiet, shadowy corridor where the desperate, grasping child dies and the sovereign is born. We have spent the previous chapters dismantling the illusions of desire, dissecting the anatomy of power, and stripping away the emotional volatility that makes you a pawn to your own ambitions. Now we arrive at the crucible. This is chapter 6. This is the Stoic transformation. To get what you want, the version of you that currently wants it must be eradicated. Read that again. Let the chilling finality of that statement settle into your bones. The paradox of ultimate power is that it cannot be wielded by trembling hands. The man who is starving will drop his sword to grab a piece of bread. He is predictable, easily manipulated, and entirely at the mercy of his appetites. The world does not yield to those who beg for its favor. It yields to those who look upon its offerings with the cold, unblinking eyes of a marble statue. Marcus Aurelius did not command the Roman Empire by desperately wishing for obedience. He commanded it because he first conquered the chaotic senate of his own mind. He transformed himself into an immovable object, and the world had no choice but to bend around him. The Stoic transformation is not merely a shift in perspective. It is a psychological death and rebirth. It is the alchemy of turning the soft, reactive flesh of your ego into cold, forged iron. Right now, your desires are chains. You are tethered to outcomes. You want the promotion, the wealth, the devotion, the status. And because you want them, they own you. Every time you check for a result, every time your heart rate spikes at a rejection, every time you alter your behavior to please a gatekeeper, you are rattling your chains. You are signaling to the universe and to the predatory instincts of other humans that you are a subject, not a king. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private journals, not as an emperor addressing his subjects, but as a warden addressing his own soul. He understood that to master the external world, one must achieve absolute, chilling authority over the internal one. The transformation begins the moment you sever the emotional contract of outcome. You must look at the object of your ultimate desire, the very thing you have bled and sweated for, and state with absolute, terrifying sincerity, I do not need this to be whole. When you truly internalize this, a profound psychological shift occurs. You stop radiating the frantic heat of desperation. You step back into the shadows, observing the board rather than desperately trying to be the most important piece on it. This is what the ancients called apatheia, not an empty numbness, but a masterful, chilling detachment from the passions that make other men weak. Imagine yourself sitting on a throne in a darkened room. The world comes to you, offering gifts, threatening ruin, whispering seductions. The untransformed mind leans forward, eyes wide, hands outstretched, reacting to every whisper. The transformed mind leans back. It watches, it waits, it evaluates. When you no longer fear the loss of a thing, you gain absolute power over it. This is the terrifying secret of getting what you want. You must become the kind of person who is entirely complete without it. This transformation requires you to embrace the forge. The obstacles, the betrayals, the failures you have endured are no longer tragedies. They are the hammer strikes shaping the iron of your psyche. The Stoic does not ask for a lighter load. He asks for broader shoulders. When a crisis strikes, the ordinary man panics. The transformed mind experiences a dark, quiet thrill. Ah, the Stoic thinks, raw material. Every slight is an opportunity to practice emotional control. Every loss is a masterclass in detachment. You stop being the victim of your narrative and become its cold, calculating author. As this transformation solidifies, an eerie phenomenon begins to manifest in your external reality. People will sense the shift. Humans are deeply attuned to the microsignals of power and desperation. When you stop chasing, when you stop reacting, you create a psychological vacuum, and human nature abhors a vacuum. Those who previously held power over you will suddenly find their leverage gone. The gatekeepers who demanded your compliance will become unsettled by your silence. By withdrawing your need for their validation, you inadvertently become a magnet for it. This is the gravity of the sovereign. A king does not chase his subjects. He sits on his throne, and they come to him. By mastering your internal state, you project an aura of self-contained authority that is deeply intoxicating to others. You begin to get what you want simply because you are no longer getting in your own way. You are no longer spilling your energy in frantic pursuit. You move with the deliberate, heavy grace of someone who knows that time and fate are working on their behalf. Marcus Aurelius stood at the edge of the Germanic frontier, surrounded by war, plague, and betrayal. His treasury was depleted, his generals were plotting, and his body was failing. Yet he remained untouchable. Why? Because the empire was not his master. His master was his own ruling center. If the empire fell, Marcus would still be Marcus. Are you prepared to undergo this transformation? Are you ready to let the desperate, anxious version of yourself wither away? It requires a brutal honesty. It requires you to look at your deepest attachments and mentally burn them to ash. You must accept that your money, your reputation, your relationships, none of it is truly yours. They are on loan from fortune, and fortune can recall the loan at any moment. When you accept this, the fear evaporates. And when the fear evaporates, you become dangerous. You become a force of nature, operating with a dark, painterly grace amidst the chaos of the world. You step into the chilling calm of the eye of the storm. The Stoic transformation is complete. You have stopped asking the world for permission, and you have started giving it commands. In the final chapter, we will discuss how to wield this newly forged power. But for now, sit in the darkness. Feel the heavy, cold iron of your new psychology. The old you is dead. The sovereign has awakened. You have arrived. The heavy iron gates of your ambition have been breached. The adversaries who doubted you have bowed. The obstacles that stood in your path have crumbled into ash. And the prize you so violently sought now rests quietly within your open palms. You have applied the principles. You have mastered the silence, manipulated the shadows, and engineered your ascent with the cold precision of a Roman architect. But listen closely, for the wind at the summit carries a chilling truth. As you stand looking down at the world you have conquered, you must realize the most terrifying reality of all. The game has not ended. It has only just begun, and the rules have suddenly, irrevocably, changed. This is the final warning. The art of getting what you want contains a hidden trapdoor, a psychological abyss that has swallowed kings, emperors, and conquerors throughout the millennia. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king who ruled the entire known world, understood this trap better than any man who has ever lived. He possessed absolute, unadulterated power. With a mere whisper, he could level cities, extinguish bloodlines, or summon the vast wealth of empires. Yet he did not sleep in silk. He often slept on the cold, hard floor. Why? because he knew that the greatest danger a man faces is not the failure to acquire what he desires. The greatest danger is the acquisition itself. When you are starving, your mind is sharp. The hunt gives you singular focus. Your ego is subdued by the sheer necessity of survival and the burning drive of ambition. But what happens when the hunger is satiated? What happens when the gold is in your vault, the crown is on your head, and the throne is yours to occupy? The rot begins. Complacency is the slow-acting poison of the victorious. The moment you get what you want, a psychological shift occurs. You transition from the hunter to the hunted. Paranoia creeps into the periphery of your vision. You begin to clutch at your possessions, terrified of losing what you fought so ruthlessly to gain. The power you sought to wield begins to wield you. It becomes a parasite, feeding on your identity, your time, and your peace of mind, until you are no longer the master of your empire, but merely its highest-ranking slave. Aurelius stared into this abyss daily. He wrote his meditations not as a guide to conquer others, but as a desperate, disciplined attempt to conquer himself after he had already won the world. He understood that getting what you want is merely a test of competence. Keeping your soul intact after you get it is the ultimate test of character. To survive your own victory, you must adopt the chilling detachment of the Stoic emperor. You must look at the wealth, the status, the lovers, and the power you have accumulated, and you must mentally strip them away. You must hold them with an open hand. The moment you close your fist around your desires, you become chained to them. If your happiness, your identity, or your sense of authority is entirely dependent on the things you have acquired, you are profoundly weak. Any man who can give you everything can also take it away. Even if no man can take it, time, disease, or the fickle turning of fate inevitably will. This is the Aurelian discipline, absolute indifference to your own success. You must be willing to walk away from the throne at any given second. Look into the eyes of the marble statues that line the corridors of history. Look at the medieval kings who drowned in their own paranoia, their heavy gold chains becoming the very shackles that dragged them into madness. They believed that getting what they wanted would finally make them invincible. They were wrong. The crown is not a symbol of freedom. It is a heavy, crushing weight of gravity. It isolates you. It turns friends into sycophants and allies into assassins. To master the art of getting what you want, you must master the art of not needing it. You must build an inner citadel so fortified, so deeply entrenched in your own unshakable will, that the presence or absence of external power means absolutely nothing to you. You treat your success as a borrowed garment. It is a purple cloak you wear for the season of your reign, fully aware that the universe will eventually demand it back. Do not let the acquisition define you. Do not let the victory soften your edges. The discipline that brought you to the top is the only thing that will prevent you from hurling yourself off the precipice. You must remain cold, calculating, and deeply observant, especially of your own mind. When pride whispers in your ear that you are untouchable, silence it with the brutal reminder of your own mortality. Memento mori. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. You now possess the ultimate blueprint. You know how to manipulate the psychological levers of the world. You know how to bend reality to your will. The tools are in your hands, heavy and sharp. But as you step forward into the empire you have carved for yourself, remember the philosopher king's final, silent warning. Power is a fire. It will warm your home, forge your weapons, and illuminate the dark. But if you lose your reverence for it, if you let it spread into the wooden beams of your ego, it will burn your entire kingdom to the ground with you locked inside. Rule your desires, or they will rule you. The choice is yours. The throne awaits.